What's up, Frame Fam? Welcome back to the channel for another video. In today's video, I want to optimize with you all how to get CRYSIS running at 60 plus frames per second with the best graphical detail settings that you can get with the 1660 Ti. I know these videos do get requested and this does help some people, so I'm going to dive through here. Now keep in mind, different hardware configurations that you may have can kind of affect these settings in terms of what performance you will see. For example, I do have a Ryzen 7 3700X. I have 16 gigs of 3200 megahertz RAM, and of course I'm playing the game on an NVMe. So with that being said, if you don't have those exact settings, or you have a lower end CPU or not as much RAM, or in the case of having a Ryzen processor, even slower memory, this can affect what you will see for performance, especially because as you start to reach the high and very high settings, you do start to utilize more RAM. At one point, I did start to reach up towards the 11 gigabytes, 12 gigabytes range. So obviously, if you had 8 gigs or less of RAM, you're going to have some issues there. But these settings are really going to help the game look good while maintaining performance. And there's a couple of ways you can tackle this if you have a 1660 Ti, or of course a graphics card that's a little bit better, like a 2060, for example. And the best way to go by it is to really keep most settings on high. Texture quality on very high does seem to use a lot more VRAM. If we switch to high, there is a long loading time with it, but if we switch to high, immediately the VRAM gets cut down to less than 3,000 megabytes being utilized out of the 6,000 available. So at very high settings, of course, we're going to be reaching towards that kind of peak level. I'm actually staring at a part of the game world that particularly uses a lot more GPU overhead than a lot of the other spaces I've encountered thus far. So while changing these settings, pay attention to this current FPS meter right here. This is really going to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. The three settings that really affect performance are post-processing, shadows, and shaders. Ray tracing, of course, does as well, but we're going to keep that off. I find that shaders really help the game look great. If I were to switch it to just very high here, you're going to see there's a little bit of a loading wait for it, but our frames per second are going to immediately dip below 50. Yeah, so now we're sitting at 49. So shaders look great, and you can totally play around with this. If you don't care about shadows, you know, if you lower shadows and you lower post-processing, the two other settings that affect performance greatly, to medium, you may be able to see now we're up in the 60s. So you can kind of trade off here, whether you want better post-processing or better shadows. Me personally, though, I like to keep it kind of evened out, especially shadows in this game. If you have shadow settings under high, I do tend to notice the blurriness in the shadows. It does stand out more than other settings. But that being said, the best way to get 60 plus frames per second, even during the more intense parts of the game, you know, you could get the 70s, 80s, even 90s in parts that I'm about to show you, but you really want to give yourself enough room that during the later parts of the game, when there's a lot of activity going on, a lot of big firefights, you know, the aliens start showing up, you really want to have a breathing room to maintain that 60 frames per second. And again, it depends on how aggressive you want to be with that. So let me show you my example. You can hit 60 plus frames per second with everything on high and textures on very high. Again, very high textures will use almost double the VRAM. However, I have switched it to high and have not noticed it destroy my performance. Even when the VRAM gets close to maxing out, I haven't noticed it hitch up in any of the tests that I've done. So I'm just going to keep this on very high. And this, again, this is aggressive settings. If you want aggressive 60 frames per second with the best quality and you don't mind dipping every once in a while just under it, especially with a variable refresh monitor, then there you go. This is the answer to that. So let me show you what I mean. You know, right now we're sitting at 90 plus frames per second. And once we go over to the vegetation, now we're in the 50s. So this is what I'm referring to when it comes to aggressive. And I have that stupid little mouse glitch. Hey, buddy. Yeah, so this is a very aggressive setting. You know, you will see a lot of the time you're way above 60, and you'll see some of the times you're below 60. So this is going to be more of a personal preference, honestly. But if you don't want less than 60 whatsoever, you want a solid 60 plus as best as you can, even during the very intense moments, you don't want any of that stutter, then what I recommend personally is taking your post-processing quality and lowering that to medium. You're going to notice that as an immediate large increase in performance. This might even be enough right here to, in a lot of circumstances, keep you at above 60, because for some reason in this particular spot, staring into all this vegetation with everything in the background, performance, as you could just see, is sub 60. 60, and we just gained what, 10-12 frames per second from lowering that from high to medium. And visually the game still looks good at this setting, but you will notice that if we lower volumetrics, this isn't going to really affect settings. We don't even get a single, we actually lost a frame there for a second, and we're maybe gaining one. So just keep that on high. Game effects quality doesn't do anything. Particle quality also has to do with explosions and in-game effects. You may gain, like you just saw for a second there, 1 frame per second when you have it on medium. Just keep it on high. Water also affects performance pretty decently, but I've noticed that when you switch it to very high, it doesn't look that much better. And when you switch it to medium, it does look that much worse. So I keep it on high because the performance only is really affected when you look at water. And this game is more of a vegetation and shadow issue than it is water effect issue when it comes to performance loss. So I keep that at high. Again, vegetation, depending on what kind of vegetation details you're looking at. In this particular scene, gave us a 2 FPS boost, keeping it on medium. So again, if you're being very aggressive about 60 frames per second and higher, keep post-processing on medium, keep vegetation on medium, and keep shadows on medium, because this is going to give you a no doubt high level of performance. Now we're in the same area we were just at with sub 60, and we're sitting in the 90s. So I'll actually go down here, because down at the bottom of this hill there is a little base. Things do get kind of intense down here. Let's save up my power armor. That way I can actually sprint in there and show you guys what I'm talking about. But the lowest performance you will see once things start getting intense is probably the high 60s to mid 60s. I know later in the game things really start to fire up. There's one level in particular that's pretty open with a lot of AI. So assuming you have a strong CPU, that should hold up to the same performance standards that we're seeing now. Yeah, so now we're in the thick of things, and we're starting to see upwards to 90, 100 frames per second now. But now, if we revert to the settings I was talking about earlier, you know, we put the shadows and post-processing on high settings, and we have more aggressive graphics detail than we do aggressive performance. You're gonna see, now we're cutting it close. Now we're dipping under 60 just as frequently as we were dipping above 70 or even 80 frames per second with the settings just set to medium. I mean, it does look better, but it doesn't look that much better. You know, if you're a performance enthusiast, you're definitely going to want to use medium for shadows and post-processing. But if you love graphics more and you don't care about dips, you know, like I said, you have that variable refresh rate monitor, then you're going to enjoy this game at high settings just as much. I don't notice the dips in the 50s and the game looks good. But, you know, again, the performance difference you get for having those settings set to medium without major loss in fidelity, that's really not that noticeable. Oh god, they're all looking for me. Anyway guys, that's really all I have for you in this video. I just wanted to help some people out who were having issues running this game while having it look good, or they were making it look too good and they just couldn't run it well at all. So this will help a lot of you out there. Make sure you have your drivers updated too through the GeForce Experience program, and I hope this video helped as many of you out as possible. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to smack that like button, as it really helps YouTube show this video out to other people who could use the assistance. And if you're new to the channel, consider subscribing for tech talk, benchmarks, and performance review videos such as this one that you're watching right now. As always, family, it's been my pleasure. Stay safe, stay happy, and keep on gaming.